Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing marvelously well. Do you know David? Yes, you do. Because if you have an Instagram account, which I think pretty much every human being on the planet does these days, you'll know AudioHertz. And that's hertz not as in ouch, but hertz as in frequency. David, how the devil are you?
I am doing marvelously well, Warren. I think I love that that's your catchphrase, and I think that's amazing. I will say this is my first time ever being on camera in front. I think this is my face reveal is what they call it.
So this is Kiss when they took off their makeup.
Yeah. So now everyone gets to see the stupid person behind all of those stupid memes. And I don't know you're interesting in that I put up a meme about smelling you, and you thought that was that intrigued you enough to wanted to do a podcast with me. So I don't know what that says about you. But did you ever find out what shampoo you eventually got to?
I'm absolutely terrible with this stuff because probably like most males, it's like whatever when you go into the store that looks like it should be okay, or a combo platter of like my wife bought some and it's the one I'm using. I don't think it's particularly fancy, but I did like that most of the comments said when they said that it was me, everybody would say versions of it looks like Warren showers regularly. So
that is an amazing compliment, right? Like if you look clean, that's a good compliment.
I've never been a beard guy. Like I don't know about you. You've got a very cool kind of stubbly beard thing.
Yeah.
I just don't carry that well. I've never carried it well from when I was a kid. And also I was one of those kids that didn't really grow facial hair particularly quickly. So, and I think I maybe when I was a kid, what I mean by like late teens, early 20s, and it was just kind of like scraggly and big patchiness and all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, the quality's not that great, but if you zoomed in on it, my beard wouldn't be too much better than what you're describing right now. But
I think when you look like that, you realize you're better off being clean shaven and showering regularly and shaving every day.
So for everyone out there wondering, the answer is you never know what flavor of shampoo or scent of shampoo Warren's going to be smelling. So
I think when I was in Britain, the British people understand it was probably like Head and Shoulders. Remember Head and Shoulders, everybody? I think does that still exist?
Yeah, I think so. It's like a dandruff shampoo though. I think it's good, moisturize your scalp.
Probably. I wouldn't know. See, I'm just clutching, picking names out of the air and trying to sound like I know what I'm talking about.
We don't have to get too much into shampoo. I thought it was a funny little thing there that happened. So I'm glad you reached out to me, and I'm glad that we're doing this now. So
well, it was good. Well, we talked a bit like in the middle of the old, as we like to say, pandemic, and came up with some ideas that kind of got pushed to the wayside because of it just got crazy. What we decided we would talk about is AI, and you brought this up as a topic, and I'd like to let you sort of start this one because you did some little research and you had a couple of great talking points. So let's talk about AI and music.
Yeah, so AI is kind of a large talking point in all industries now, right? Like you've seen those on Instagram, AI generated art, right? Everyone was doing those selfies. And so it's a huge talking point for all industries, not just music. But I think obviously we're here to talk about the interesting stuff that has to do with music and specifically production. There's some really cool stuff that people are doing that I don't know if they're going to have real use in modern production and people actually doing production, but I think it's definitely possible, and they're definitely going to be tools that people are going to be able to use in order to, help them aid in their production and help them aid in their own decisions. So I found a few different things that are cool. And there are different types of AI, right? One of the things that we were talking about a little bit before is there's an artist named Holly Hendon, and she used an AI neural network, interpreted her voice recording. So she fed it, whatever clips of her voice and songs that she sang or vocal recordings. And the program was then able to analyze those recordings and create her voice in a text to speech type of way. So she was then able to type lyrics out of the song she ended up doing. She ended up doing Dolly Parton's Jolene, and she typed out the lyrics, played the guitar behind it, and then, was able to have a fake version of herself, a fake but real version of herself.
Let's listen to a little bit of it. We did for a few seconds, and I won't say what I think immediately, but let's play a little bit. So my gut reaction as a producer is, wow, that girl's got great pitch, but it's a little stiff and I wish it was a little bit more emotional. I like the vibrato. Jolie. She has a beautiful vibrato on the end. But if you just played that to me as a song, I'd be like, wow, I'd really like to produce this girl because she can sing. She's got great pitch, a wonderful tone, but it's lacking emotion. But there's no way if you played that to me cold, my brain would have gone, oh, that sounds like really artificial AI. So that's scary. That's scary. It just sounds like an unemotional, or that's not fair. It doesn't sound unemotional. It sounds not emotional enough for a song like that.
The way I hear it is it's not emoting the right things on the right words at the right times. And I think that makes sense, right? As AI, they're trying to figure out how to say these words that you typed out and they don't get, exactly the tonality of what you're trying to say. But it is, like you said, it's scary. You wouldn't realize.
Does anybody know how much manipulation was done to it after it was done? If this is where AI is now and you literally just type some stuff in and put some sheet music in front of it, then it's scary because obviously it could get really scary from there. But if it's what I feel like it is, which is it's been created and then maybe manipulated and retimed or whatever as well.
Yeah, I assume it's been manipulated as far as like some tuning, some, manipulating to get the vibrato to sound more natural. I assume, but looking at I'm here, there's a Pitchfork article right here, pitchfork.com. They don't really give anything into the creative process, but I do know that there are like other companies that are doing like deep fake voices where you can, say you want to sound like Obama or say you want to sound like Kanye West talking, not that you'd want to, but say you did. And they have those voices analyzed and you could then, sound like them. I don't see it as a replacement for artists. I think that's what a lot of people are afraid of, right? Especially with this kind of stuff, they see it like, oh, these things might, take away my job in some capacity. I don't necessarily agree with that. I could see why somebody might think that, but I think there's really uses for this in production as far as like, say somebody missed, their artist left and you need to like retract or you want to do a new background vocal or something. And this is all you have. It's a tool that you could use that might work.
I agree. But we're already sort of there. I mean, what I mean is like, when if you use like some of the tuning tools like Autotune and Melodyne and all the other ones, there's so many, you can change the throat length. So you can change it from sounding quite a narrow voice to sounding like a narrow voice. That's the same pitch. There's the same note. Here's the same note. It's just all that's happening is that, you know what I mean? The pitch can stay the same, but it can sound like it's being sung by somebody who, who's 6'4" and weighs 300 pounds, or sung by somebody who's, 5'2" and weighs 95 pounds. I'm generalizing and it doesn't make any sense, but you understand the differences in textures of voices. You can do that so easily now. I've had people send me stuff that has background vocals, and I was like, who are the girls singing on the backgrounds? And the guy says to me, that's me. And I was like, how did you do that? And he said, well, I got the pitch, and then I just changed inside of one of these pieces of software, just change the throat length, and I'm able to make it sound very, very narrow rather than very narrow. What I'm trying to say, we've had versions of this kind of technology with so much incredible manipulation for the longest time. It's just now being sort of like put together in a way that's maybe even more scary. I really don't know what I think of it. This is part of our conversation.
Yeah.
To find out. What do you think about this eventuality of AI?
This specific way that AI is being used, I think is just, there's no negative aspects that are going to come from it other than people using it, in ways that, to scam people by identity theft, I think, right? Like that could be a way that people use it, in a bad way.
Well, what does she have to do to get the amount of samples of her voice in there in order for them to be able to create this?
It's a good question. I don't know how involved that is. I'm pretty sure you just feed a computer or whatever, a bunch of as many different vocal recordings as you can, and then it analyzes them and comes up with something that sounds similar. I don't know how involved it is and how long it takes.
I presume logically, like anything, the more references you put in there, the better the end product would be. I think the reason why I touched on that was because you said about, the potential of scamming and taking famous people's voices, maybe, and like, oh, I just found this really rare recording of, John Lennon or something like that. And then but then presumably they would have to have a lot of isolated vocals of John Lennon and feed it in there. But that is going to be a real possibility, isn't it? And somebody could be selling for $10 million an undiscovered John Lennon demo of him doing Help on acoustic guitar.
Hey,
Am I just giving people ideas? Sorry.
We should cut that out. That's a good idea, Warren. It's possible, that sort of thing. I think those recordings are out there, right? You can get John Lennon isolated vocal or isolated talking voice in enough interviews that could be done, and that they have done that with other celebrities. As far as like when you're streaming, there's like TTS services or text to speech services that you pay a little bit extra to send a text to speech to a streamer, and it sounds like well,
because you think about like an artist. What you could do is you could get somebody who's a great singer, not just from the perspective of timing and pitch, but like incredible phrasing. And you could load in their phrasing and then take the John Lennon sound-alike or whatever, but use it with some incredible phrasing, which would then make it seem really legitimate. Especially somebody, there's many singers who can mimic and stuff, because what the AI might not be able to do could be done in other ways. And just the way you time, when you take like Melodyne or in just the same way you use like Vocal Align, where you have like a lead vocal and then you can mimic the backgrounds in time, which I love, by the way. I think it's a fantastic piece of software because it's great, because then what I don't like to do, and I suppose this comes down to such a huge conversation, is I don't really like to tune unless I have to, because I want to keep it natural. But I'm not like some, disappear up my own butt kind of elitist guy on this. I just find that if I've got like a lot of background vocals and I'm working with a young or an inexperienced singer, rather than going in there and chopping up everything syllable by syllable and then retiming it and then tuning everything to within an inch of its life. I've done that a couple of times and I realize it ends up sounding like a bad robot singing. I just leave the tuning as it is typically, and then just try and vocal align phrases and then A/B it against the lead vocal. And what I end up doing is having ever so slightly pitchy vocals that are just timed a little bit better. And that usually sounds like a much better way of going than sitting there and timing everything perfectly and then tuning everything perfectly. That gets so small sounding and so artificial. It's a really tough case. Our ears are so tuned now that sometimes I go back to records that I used to think were like the most timed up, perfect sounding thing ever, from the 80s, and they sound like punk rock almost now. You're like, wow, we let a lot of really cool stuff go back in the 80s that now wouldn't get on the radio. That's
incredible that when you go back and listen to multi-tracks and you hear how out of time things could be, or out of tune at some points things could be, but you never
thought about it at the time. Yeah.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And we're so dialed into everything these days by looking at waveforms and just staring at a screen that these things are like, they stick out to you and they drive you crazy. And these are things you would never have been able to worry about.
If I go back and listen to like seminal records like Dark Side of the Moon or Asia, Steely Dan, or any Stevie Wonder record, they actually don't really, suffer's a strong word, but they don't have any of those things that really jump out to you anymore, because there were albums made by artists that were perfectionists given the level of technology that was available. I make this argument, and I do it all the time, about going back to, say, somebody like Mutt Lange, who is one of the greatest producers that ever lived. It's almost like what he did in analog is unbelievable. Like he would come in and he would just do take after take and get it right and get it absolutely fantastic. But now that digital does that, in his hands, it doesn't seem to be any better. He can't improve it. He almost... Do you know what I mean? He knew every trick within analog to get it sound great. But when he's in digital, the records he's making in digital, they don't sound like Mutt Lange anymore. I mean, maybe they do in certain ways, because he's an incredible songwriter and an incredible musician. And when I met some of the Def Leppard guys, I asked them about working with him, and they said to me that he would go into the live room and sing all of the harmony parts and then have them mimic it, which is incredible to hear from the band themselves.
Yeah,
That's how
absolutely.
talented Mutt Lange was. Now what you would do is you would just take the lead vocal and then stack and build the harmonies inside of a plugin and then tend the band to mimic them.
There's no better or worse though, right? It's just different. Like, would you rather be in the studio with Mutt Lange just repeating over and over again to get perfection?
A lot of like guys that grew up in listening to music in the 70s often say, and I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying it, they come to me and they say, you know, the records I grew up listening to, I hear it all the time. You could probably go to any YouTube video discussing these topics and see 100 people making this point, and they'll say, we didn't used to do that, or most importantly, the records I bought and listened to in the 70s didn't used to do that. The reality is like most of the American records, those American rock records, I'm good friends with Jack Douglas, who made Toys in the Attic, who made Rocks. I'm good friends with Jay Messina, who was the engineer on those records, and many other of that period. Shelly Yakos is a very good friend of mine who did Don't Fear the Reaper and Damn the Torpedoes. I mean, some of the greatest albums ever made in that period. And they will all tell me, yes, we did. We slowed down the tape to get the high notes. We would do whatever we took. We would, if there was a drum part that was out of time, we would cut the tape. They used to do all those things. It just used to take a bleeding long time.
Insane amount of time compared to what today it would take.
It's rumored that Comfortably Numb, they slowed down the tape for David Gilmour to hit the high note. Either way, that may or may not have happened. The point is, it's the kind of thing that did happen. When Mike Oldfield did Tubular Bells, there were certain parts, he did that entirely on his own. He couldn't play the instrument fast enough to play the part. So he just slow it down, play it an octave lower, then speed the tape back up again. Go to 15 ips, play it one octave lower, half speed, speed it back up again. Very famously, George Martin in My Life, the harpsichord, slowed the tape down to half speed, played it an octave lower, then sped it back up. If he had to fix anything, he was punching in at half speed. We have always done that. Engineers and producers have always cheated in one way, shape, or form. Sometimes it was incredibly naive, and sometimes it was incredibly sophisticated for the time. Now we have the tools that make all of those things possible. I think the thing that rubs everybody the wrong way is what we're talking about with the AI is like, what about if this is somebody that you're not fixing or finding a tool, but somebody who could never actually perform it in the first place? I think that's the thing that scares everybody, isn't it? Where you could just potentially get somebody walk into the studio and go, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, B, blah, 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 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And then la, 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 comes out the other side. I think that's what everybody's afraid of, isn't it?
I love that you use the word cheated because that is a word that it's probably not the right word, but it's a word that people would use in those scenarios. And it's interesting. It's like, even back then they were going, oh, well, you slowed down the tape to do the solo and In My Life. So that's, that you cheated. You didn't really play it. But it's like, no, that's part of the whole thing. It's not cheating. It's using a specific tool or, your method to enhance or to make what you're doing better.
We're just all afraid that somebody's going to read the alphabet and then outside the other side comes, Dolly Parton singing. That's what everybody's afraid of.
But yeah, you're right. I think you are right. That is the fear, because it's like, okay, now all this talent I worked for, all this work I put in, is that going to be for nothing? That's a scary thing to think. But I think regardless of what technology is out there, regardless of if I can go and just type ABC and they could come out with a Dolly Parton song, there's always going to be something that it can't do or it can't replicate. And that's going to be your taste, your emotion, and all of that stuff. That's just, a computer is never going to be able to do that. Sure, I might be able to type in some words and they might be able to sing it for me, but I still have to figure out what it should sing and, how it should sing it. Maybe there's still aspects of it that, you still need to be able to aid in it. So I don't think I understand the fear, but I don't think people should be fearful of this kind of stuff, because this is technology. It's always going to get a little bit weird. It's always going to get, you're always going to cheat a little bit with new technology, and people are always going to think you're cheating when you're using a thing that's new and hasn't been around and helps you in a way that has never been before.
I think all technology in the right hands is just more incredible tools to make amazing music. And I don't know if that's necessarily a problem. I think we were blessed in certain periods to get a crossover between true art and great popular music, but it's not all the time. We've got to remember that. I think all of us have rose-tinted spectacles. I think we believe that in the 70s, every single song in the top 40 was the greatest song ever. But you and I know there was a lot of incredible music in all kinds of different decades, mixed in with a lot of absolute garbage that hasn't stood the test of time whatsoever, and derivative versions of what was great at the time. I'm not going to name bands because that's really kind of evil. But for every great rock band, there was the derivative kind of like label-driven songwriter version of that. There's always been that. It's just that now we live in a world where access is so huge. People can stream music without having to hear it on the radio, so that they can hear it in any environment, whether it be cell phone, laptop, I don't know, even your watch. You know what I mean? You can hear music anywhere now. It's all about what's happening. It's the democratization of music. I saw a report just a couple of days ago, actually just before the Christmas break. The projection on the music industry is insane. I mean, you probably know over the last 4 years, it's grown 4x in 4 years. And they're projecting like in the next 10 years, all it's doing is growing, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. It's just the traditional idea of the music industry in the 70s, 80s, and 90s has just gone out the window. It's not just one specific audience that has disposable income. Now it's everywhere, in every medium and every format. And I think we just have to embrace that.
Embrace everything. And I think embracing the technology is really going back to AI. I think what you were saying about all of those classic recordings, I mean, those classic recordings aren't the same if you take out the tape machine and you give them you give them Pro Tools, right? They're just going to come out different because the technology dictates the art in a way. What kind of technology you have is how you create the art.
I always joke about, maybe you and I did this on a call, I always joke about Doogie Howser. So like Doogie Howser's like early 80s, isn't it? And I believe it has like a DX7 piano sound on it. I'd have to hear it again. I always make that joke because you go like 5 years earlier and you had Taxi. And you had like, the most glorious 70s
or Whirly, whatever it was.
Or the Whirly, You just have this beautiful electric piano sound.
Yeah.
Because that's what was de rigueur at the time in the late 70s. And then you go to Doogie Howser, which was a fun show, don't get me wrong. I watched it as a little kid and loved it. But my point is like, the piano sound, you listen to them back to back, it's a joke now. You're like, why would anybody use a DX7 piano sound? But your point, I'm just reinforcing your point. The technology dictated the sound of the music.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the way it is even with AI. I don't think people are going to be putting in, a recipe and coming out with a hit song that's going to be on the radio. But I do think there are ways that people are going to use this to create really cool things that, we're not even probably thinking of right now, that probably aren't in our head, or we can't even figure out.
I can't remember if I was I agree entirely. I can't remember when I was it was either Epic or Capitol, and I was an A&R consultant for both those labels. We had a meeting at my old studio, Harmony, and these two guys came in and they had taken, I don't remember how many thousands of songs, but they had taken thousands and thousands of songs that were like top 10 hits over decades, like 70s, 80s, and 90s, and early 2000s. They'd taken all of these songs and they had dumped them into a computer and come up with an algorithm for what makes a hit song. What was consistently happening in all of these hit songs. And so what they said is like, they wanted to sell this technology to major record labels. And I think they did, and major record labels use it. And you just take the new song that your new producer, artist, writer, whatever has done, and you feed it into the machine, and out the other side, it tells you the probability of it being a hit song.
That's insane.
But it's not, if you can think it these days, you can do it. It's like when we were joking about earlier about, taking John Lennon's isolated vocals and then recording like Help on acoustic guitar, like really naively and crappy sounding, and then putting his vocal against it and then selling it and going, I found the original Help demo recorded on a cassette player in his bedroom in 1960, whatever. You get what I'm saying? Anything is possible now.
So that's just one way that AI is used. There are some other cool ways. So there are plugins that do sample matching. So this is like a little bit of an easier thing to wrap your head around, right? Yeah, there's a company called Jamahook, and it's still in, I think they have a version 1, but the second version is still in beta. So it's not that fleshed out yet, but the idea is really there. And what it is It's a plugin. You sign up, you get credits. It's like almost like a Splice type of thing where I load up a sample, say I have a drum loop, and I'm really enjoying this drum loop. It's got great, a great feel, great groove. And now I kind of, all right, I'm stuck. Where do I go from here? I have this drum loop. I didn't do anything. Now I need something to put on top of it. And I'm thinking of like, all right, so if you're a beginner engineer, you're just using loops, you're just kind of getting started on putting things together. I load the drum loop into the plugin. The plugin will then give me loops that it thinks will match with this drum loop. So there'll be a list of samples available, and I can then audition them and see, okay, what goes with this drum loop. And it doesn't pick them for you. Obviously, you still have to give your final decision on what you want, what you want to do with it. But it does aid in selecting what samples to use. And that's the thing that like producers, electronic producers, hip hop producers, they have sample libraries that are, gigs and gigs huge that, how do you keep track of all that stuff? It's really difficult. And a tool like this makes that a little bit easier. And there are other tools that aren't AI driven, like, XO takes all your samples and figures out, like what tonality of them and kind of matches them based on the tonality and the instrument. But this takes it to the next level where it goes, okay, you have a loop here. You have this beat. Now here are loops that are going to sound good with it. Pick whatever you want, throw it in there and make a song out of it. This could also be another way to save some time and make things useful. And it makes it a lot easier for people that are just starting out that maybe don't want to, record their own thing. Is that good for everybody? I don't know. I think it is.
The whole time you're describing this is fascinating. So this is the producer in me responding to exactly. By the way, fantastic explanation. I feel like I know exactly what it can do. And I think we touched on this the other day. We weren't talking about this one, but when we were on a call the other day, we were talking about these kinds of technologies. This one didn't come up because you and I talked about what makes great music. And what typically makes great music, at least for me, the groundbreaking, kick down the door, greatest music of all time, is when you take different genres, different feels, different ideas, and smash them together. There's no rock and roll without blues. Simple as that. Take away the blues, you've got country. And you've got everything perfect, and that's not fair, but you know what I mean. Everything, no bent, out of tune notes, none of that kind of super lazy grooves and feels that blues bring, and none of that expressiveness. A different kind of expression in country. Don't get me wrong, a different stuff. But when country and blues smash together, you got early rock and roll. Those incredible guitar players were great chicken-picking kind of country players that threw in some like blues stuff, and they came up with some of the greatest rock and roll kind of guitar playing ever. When I met Jeff Beck a few years ago, his favorite guitar player growing up was Cliff Gallup, who's Gene Vincent's guitar player. And that is the perfect blend of country, chicken-picking, and blues ever. So that's my point. Rock and roll is a baby of many, many different genres. I'm not just limiting it to that, but blues is the fundamental thing that brings it all back. Then you've got soul and funk and disco and R&B and all of that other amazing stuff, that you take that out of modern music, it's soulless and lifeless. We need all of that. And then you've got hip hop, the way it started coming into rock, even just pop, like Blondie and Rapture and all this kind of stuff. It just added a whole different angle. Of course, Herbie Hancock, Rocket, that whole kind of hip hop culture from that as well. So I think the point is like all of those things, you remove them from music, you end up with what I believe would be some of the most sterile stuff ever. We talked the other day about New Wave. New Wave is German synth pop music with disco. That's New Wave. It's just beats going 4 on the floor. Even Joy Division, Love Will Tear Us Apart is a disco drum beat with a German noise sounding kind of guitar part. It's almost a direct part from that with tons of disco elements into it. And that's New Wave. And New Wave and post-punk was some of the biggest, most important music ever. Two-tone. It's all ska. It's all Caribbean music. When I hear you talk about that AI for the drum loop, all I hear is things that match it well. So that's cool. I love it. Great. You have a drum loop. You find other elements that fit really well through this algorithm that says this will work really well. Well, you know what? What makes the great music is the stuff that you'd never think of doing, and you put it together. The Police. The Police is Roxanne, jank. It's reggae skank ska, but with a punk rock attitude. You don't have to, those days are over, Roxanne. It's not
something that you're saying a machine wouldn't be able to think and put the put those two together.
You need that human being to go, but take punk rock and take ska and put the two things together, and you got the Police. You got the first two Police records, which those are two of the greatest sounding, best records ever. The Police and Nigel Gray, between the two entities, created absolute masterpieces, and still one of the most two of the most important records, because it reinforced a whole movement in Britain with two-tone. And so borrowed from that, plus it borrowed from punk rock. And most of the songs are three instruments playing, maybe one guitar overdub a couple of times, and a vocal with occasional backgrounds. I mean, masterful. And no algorithm is going to do that unless you tell it, do the Police. Of course, I'm saying, but to do something that's inventive, that is that inventive. What I like about human beings, when you get people of that caliber, like those three incredible guys, is that they all bring a different sensibility. You know, Sting brought this incredible songwriting talent, but he was also a jazz guy. You know, it was playing in jazz bands and prog bands, you know, people that fans of that period will know Strontium 90 and all of the kind of like prog stuff that they were doing as well simultaneously. Playing with, was it Mike Howlett and all these quite well-known prog guys in Britain. You know, so you've got this incredible musicality that they're all bringing in, this really sophisticated ears, and then put together with a punk rock meets ska sensibility. I mean, you need somebody to go, here's a drum loop that I like. Please now try a genre that doesn't make any sense, like death metal or this or that, and put some Hawaiian in it and all this kind of.
Why couldn't it do that though?
It could, if there's a brain that goes and says, try this and try that, and then sits there and it's just, you know, some of the greatest music is made through sampling. And some of it is mental sampling. Look, if I read the book, is it Songwriters on Songwriting? There's a great quote from Keith Richards, where he says that when he gets stuck writing songs, he just puts on classic radio and listens to some of the greatest songs of all time. So what is he doing? He's working his brain algorithm. He's listening and he's hearing. Such a stupid, naive thing to say. His brain algorithm.
I like that.
Yeah, I know, it makes no sense, but you understand the spirit of it. The point is like, you know, he's listening to some of the greatest songs ever, and he's thinking, oh my God, I love that turn of phrase. I love this. I love that. And then he's processing it through his microcomputer, and out comes Keith Richards. You know, out comes Beast of Burden, one of the greatest songs ever written. It's just an absolutely beautiful song. Because for Beast of Burden, for instance, taking that as a song, it's a tough guy. It's a tough guy being vulnerable to his woman. I'll be your Beast of Burden. I mean, it's such a beautiful song. How do you get inside of a brain with an algorithm that says, I need a very masculine, tough guy to sing a song that's really vulnerable about his woman and shows how much he is in love with her and how he wants to protect her? What algorithm is that?
I think you're right. There's probably not an algorithm for that. That's always going to be a natural human element, and that you can never take away from that, right? That, like you said, it's him feeling something and wanting to say something, and that computer can never, you know, show that as well as a human can. But with that said, and I like to play devil's advocate here, there might be other things that, you know, the algorithm might put together a different, you know, it might come up with it might mix two genres that you never even thought about that actually work. Then you could take that idea and those two genres and then you know, take it to the next level rather than, you know, have the algorithm put together.
For me, producer brain, what I like about the idea of the algorithm, for people that maybe are very, very skilled in certain genres and certain ways of recording, who want to touch on things that they don't know, that seems exciting to me. Like if you say to me, this is really good, you can pull in loops and you can bring in other sounds that, you know, maybe I can choose some like more aggressive, you know, industrial or EDM or whatever it might be. All the genres I've worked in anyway. But my point is, if you're more of an acoustic vocal guy or girl and you're doing music like that, but you want to add something, a little bit of bleak to it, you can find a loop that's kind of, you like the sound of, but you want to manipulate it and make it sound more unique. That seems to me like a really incredible use for it. I've been in writing sessions. Everybody's sitting over a laptop. That's what everybody does these days. Everybody's sitting on a laptop, working on ideas. You know, maybe somebody's got an acoustic, somebody's got a USB keyboard. Maybe there's, you know, like a main computer going in here and you're flying in ideas and got a scratch mic going and people are singing things and doing stuff. Great writing session with 4 or 5 people. And you've got a guy or a girl sitting over a laptop who comes up with a quote unquote beat, an actual beat, not a euphemism for song, but a beat. And they are now a co-writer of the song because they went with like these 3 elements, the hat, the kick and the snare. They're now a co-writer of the song. When I first started writing songs, you sat down with an acoustic guitar or piano and you wrote a song and then you produced it and those elements came to the song. But now in the songwriting process, because they're all coming from the ground up, you now have a 1 in 4 people, so now there's a 25% ownership of the song by the guy or girl who produced the beat. Now think of the freedom as a singer-songwriter who doesn't have access to the guy or girl that's building that beat, but now has access to a tool that can go back to it being a production tool and now no longer like a songwriter part of it. That frees up a lot of stuff for creativity. So that is a bonus in my book, because now what it means is like you've got artists, not just, and I love what you're saying about beginners, but now just any artist, a really talented singer-songwriter who doesn't have the money, lives in, I don't know, some small town in anywhere in the world and doesn't, the big city's hours away, money away, train, whatever, now is able to produce music to a level that will get them noticed. That to me seems really, really super exciting.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely definitely a way that people can use it. But I still think like beginners are going to be the people that, are going to gravitate towards something easy. And I think maybe the artist is a beginner in that sense of producing a song. Maybe they're not so, or writing a song. They're not as, experienced in that and they need a tool to help them. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, like, do you think, is it cheating and is it bad for music?
Cheating is a really nebulous thing, because if you're an orchestra or a jazz band and everything is performed live, then overdubbing is cheating.
Yep.
If you're overdubbing on 4-track, then conceivably being able to redo the song on 8-track is cheating, because now you only need 2 people, not 4 people in the band, for instance. I don't know, you understand my point. And then 16, 24, now unlimited tracks. How do you
Cheating.
Measure that? The wax cylinder guy is going to be upset at the person that's on tape and able to punch in and fix, even if it's 2-track.
Yep.
There's always somebody that it's cheating. I think the only thing that matters is the results at the end of the day. And what tends to happen is you get music that is really well-written, poppy, thus well-produced, meaning perfect in that respect, that instantly is hooky, and you and I know where we're going, and instantly 6 months later is completely disposable. So we're human beings. We are biological animals. And we tend to, at least I can only speak from my personal experience and from my friends, and I'm sure your friends as well, we like the wrongness. We like the humanity that we can identify with. And there is no problem with listening to something that's absolutely perfect and amazing, and your daughter or your son who's like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is dancing to and having fun. But you know what? 3 months is a long time in an 8-year-old's life. I know, I've got an 8-year-old daughter. And in 3 months' time is a totally different song that they're obsessed with. And that's absolutely fine. For 2 weeks, they're singing in the car and they want you to play it in the background. And then after 2 weeks, that's like 5 months in my life, they're all like, Daddy, I don't like that song anymore. You know what I mean? It's almost like, I almost feel like there's a whole conversation where people, why are we worried about that? When Mark and I just did our top 10 songs of the year, I chose Adele. I cheated because a song was released at the end of 2021, but was still number 1 in 2022, so I cheated. I chose an Adele song, which is not an auto-tuned, gridded, perfect track. It's just a piano vocal with some very simple elements of drums, and very well mixed by Tom Elmhurst, and I loved it, and it was great. I also chose Queen, a song they recorded in 1991 that finally got released, and I did choose some modernish songs. Lewis Capaldi, who's a great Scottish singer. And again, pretty real. I'm not saying they didn't correct a few things here and there, but ultimately it's a very singer-songwriter driven song. And these were all songs that stood out to me. And Mark did a similar job. He chose a Lizzo song, which had this infectious groove and this amazing bass playing in
About
it.
Damn Time.
Yeah, incredible song.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he also chose a song from Revolver on the reissue album that had been remixed by Giles. That was one of the original, not original demos, but was the backing track that without the vocals on was just one of the best sounding tracks and really showcased what incredible musicians and how they interacted together live off the floor. It was the live off the floor recording that eventually became, the final master when they sung on it.
Yeah.
So to me, it's horses for courses. It's like you're not going to remove that humanity. And I don't know why anybody is worried about what the pop hits are. I don't get it. I don't know where people get upset. It's like if it's not your genre and you don't listen to it, why are you worried? There's plenty of great music out there. And we have to remember that, the big artists of old were selling hundreds of thousands of records, not multi-millions of records. So you can still sell well and be successful if you're really good at your craft. I think one of the things that we get a little bit lost in is a lot of the stuff has elements of what is really good about music, but doesn't have it all. It's like if you want to be Pink Floyd or Radiohead even, you've got to do what those bands did. You've got to have a song like boom, ba da dum, boom, 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 ba, hook, hook, a hook, 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 hook. Money, it's a hook. It's a hook. It's a hook. Don't give me man, I don't want to sell out, bro. Do you know how many times I've heard that with bands? I'm like, give me a song that people can sing to. I'm sorry, Money is a pop song. It is an amazing sing-along track. It gets you straight away. What a hooky bass line with what an incredible vocal. It's just, there's nothing wrong with writing a great, great song. I think bands, they tend to hide behind being cool and wanting to, here in LA, be at a party in Silver Lake and Echo Park and have all their friends say, you're a really cool bro, man. You didn't sell out. Well, great, but how about selling? How about selling? Stop worrying about selling out. How about selling? Yeah. It's such a huge discussion, isn't it? It's like...
It is. And there's 9 topics here that I want to jump into that are coming over.
I know. Like I said to you at the beginning, I think maybe off camera, it's like you get a very different Warren when it's just loose and we're going for the discussion.
Yeah. I think what you're saying, and I completely agree, and you do reiterate this in a lot of your videos, and I completely agree, is whatever it takes, right? Get it done at whatever it takes. And if that's going to be using an AI or using whatever, and you need that to make your song or to start your production, use it. Use whatever you need to make your art, to get motivation, to get started. Whatever you need, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Nothing is cheating. Nothing is wrong. There's no rules.
I agree. I mean, the thing is, I can listen to Susie and the Banshees' Hong Kong Garden, which is G and F, 2 chords, pretty much the whole song, and think it's one of the greatest high energy songs ever written and recorded. But I think Susie was, listeners will know, maybe 19 or 20 years old when she did that song. At the same time as listening to Bohemian Rhapsody, which is, again, made by people maybe 26 or 27 years old, still super young. That is a super long, absolute masterpiece of a track, with operatic sections, I love saying that because of the movie, Then we get to the operatic section. So to me, it's all valuable. I think what happens for all of us we have to be very careful about this is when we sort of delineate and say that one piece of art is more valuable than another. I mean, I've used this example many, many times. Mr. Picasso being interviewed on television. I don't remember what it was. Johnny Carson or somebody like that, one of those kind of talk show hosts. And they interview him and they're about to go to commercial break, and the talk show host gives Picasso a pad and paper and a pencil and says, would you mind doing us a drawing or something like that? So they go off to commercial break, come back a couple of minutes later, and the talk show host holds up the drawing to the audience, and the audience are all clapping and this kind of stuff. And the host says to Picasso, does it bother you that a drawing that just, I don't know, maybe took you 2 minutes might be worth $250,000? Picasso pauses and he says, it didn't take me 2 minutes. It took me a lifetime. And I think that this is the thing that people miss. I watch so many YouTube videos that are all talking about the Phrygian, Lydian, 7/4, 8/4, 9/4, 12/8, blah, blah, blah. And aren't they geniuses for doing this? And I'm like, I love that. Turn It On Again is one of my favorite songs. A lot of it's in 13/8. Wuthering Heights has bars of 7/4 in it. There's so many of my favorite songs are long, have multiple tempo changes, key changes, and they're all some of my favorite songs. But I don't see any more validity in that than I do in Hong Kong Garden or Working Class Hero by John Lennon, which essentially, apart from one section, is A minor and G. So to me, it's just like, what is the point? Art is art. Great art can be a song like Working Class Hero, which speaks to our whole generation of people, as well as Bohemian Rhapsody, as well as Wuthering Heights, as well as any jazz rock classic. We can listen to Spyro Gyra, or all these stuff like at the Crusaders. Street Life is one of my favorite tracks. What a masterpiece of songs. Dream of the Blue Turtles, that Sting album, still one of my favorite solo albums by anybody ever. And it's like, talk about coming from like the post-punk, ska, new wave thing, and then suddenly doing a jazz style record. I mean, they all live in my wheelhouse of music that I love. And I think the difficulty comes down to like when suddenly only one of those things and only one of those ways of making art or music is important and everything else is useless. Oh my God, I don't believe it. These guys are not good because it's only two chords. You know what I mean? There's too much of that. There's too much of that conversation. A lot of it's just to do with a sense of elitism and superiority that if you understand it, but you and I both know that with all of this technology and stuff like that, whatever might be available, most of the people, 99.9% of them that wrote the music that we all love had very little or no understanding of any kind of level of musicality beyond actual music. They weren't sitting there and going and doing PhD level music studies before writing Working Class Hero.
Well, you can't learn good taste, right? You can't, or maybe you think you can. I personally think you can't. Good taste is something you're born with. You either know what is good and what's not good, and a good songwriter is going to figure out what works by intuition alone. That's just going to come naturally. They're going to figure that out by playing, by messing around.
Mozart said all music is improvised. All great music is. So he's sitting there like playing around a piano. He's improvising. He's not sitting there going, I just want to write inside of the Phrygian, and then when after 2 bars I want to go to the Locrian, and then I want to come back to the Lydian. And no. He wrote that, and maybe he did those kinds of things, and maybe because it sounded right to his brain. That's what he wanted to write. And I do think understanding the tools can be really good, especially in like composition for movies, when you want to create certain tensions. But most of the time, people have experienced it, and then you ask them, like Tom Holkenberg, Junkie XL, who will do these kind of moods and all this kind of stuff. And maybe he's understood and gone through it at some stage, but it's in his DNA now, and now he's just doing something that reminds him of a mood or a piece, and then somebody else analyzes what afterwards, and he's like, "Oh, is that what I did? I didn't realize."
So are you recommending people don't focus on these little things, or focus on theory, or using certain things? Are you recommending kind of just work on your intuition or your taste, or listening to music, or experiencing different types of music more?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and yes. I mean, I agree to all of that, to be quite honest. The question is really the answer, yes. Experience as many different genres as you possibly can. I'm a big fan of two-tone. It's when I was a little kid, it was the music that was really prevalent for a couple of years in the very late 70s, early 80s, when I was little. And I just remember all of the big kids, dressed like mods, and then the big kids had like Vespers, and Quadrophenia came out, and I was just like in awe of it, looking up like, wow. And it was so important because it showed what Britain was made up of. Actually, Britain was a massive multicultural society, and all the bands were totally multicultural in all ways, shapes, and form, in the music and the blends and everything. And it changed the whole landscape of Britain, because you had, 99% of the House of Commons and the House of Lords. It was 100% just old white guys. And there was almost no women, and definitely no minorities. And what happened is like that music became super, super popular, and everybody looked around and went, wait there, this is what our country actually looks like. And this is the music. And so that was a beautiful thing, because you had all of this Caribbean music, all of this Jamaican music of reggae and ska, blended with like a punk rock attitude. And then you had bands like the Specials and the Beat, and then, more of a party like Madness, and all of these incredible musicians. And they all wrote amazing songs which still sound incredible to this day. So that's the perfect example to me of blending of genres and blending of all kinds of ideas together to create something new that then, sparked what the Police were doing and all of this other stuff. Yeah. So yes to your question. Every part of your element you said I agree with.
I think that pretty much touches on everything with AI. I mean, there's a few other things as far as there's another plugin that makes MIDI elements for you, and you can actually just drop it in. Again, I don't know too much about that, and it's similar to the other thing where it's kind of making something for you. It's a little bit different in that it's creating a melody and giving you the MIDI for it. So it's a little bit different than just taking pre-made loops. It's actually an AI actually making your melody for you. Haven't messed with that one too much, but it another interesting concept and along the same vein of all the other ones where it's these are all things that might be able to help you. They might not, but they're all tools. And it's interesting.
I won't say who it is, but I wrote a song a few years ago. I pitched it to an artist. They didn't use it. And the original writer, I think, eventually will put it out on Atlantic on their own record. But within 2 months of me pitching it to the artist, they had written another song using the same title and the same idea as it, and it became a hit. And I won't say what it is because everybody knows what it is. And it sucked. But it is a little bit, the reason why I use it as an analogy, because I can see the charted success of something, of maybe that's what a lot of this kind of AI stuff is going to be, is when you're saying about loading in a MIDI thing, a good artist, because the artist I pitched to is very talented, don't get me wrong, but genuinely really talented acoustic guitar vocalist, really super talented guy. And yeah, it sparked off and they're like, wow, we should write a song like that using that idea. And off they did. They went off and wrote it. What I believe could happen maybe with that MIDI idea is when you're stuck or like you're saying, a beginner, it might give you something to work from, which sparks off another idea. There's been a lot of times I work with artists that have had loops of tracks. And there's some famous lawsuits without us having to get into it, where people have taken the groove of a track and rewritten a new song over it and then sued and lost. And because they took that original groove. It's happened a lot, as we know, quite famously. And then sometimes they just get away with it. And these are huge songs that people love and are not critical of as being bad computer-generated songs. Nobody listens to the song that I'm talking about and says, oh, it sounds artificial, do they? They don't listen to it and go, they have fights over whether the lawsuit should have won or not. There's lots of discussion about that. But nobody says, oh, it's an artificial track. I think going back to the very first thing we said, all of these tools in the right hands are just more inspirational tools. In the wrong hands, they'll probably produce very, very disposable, easy to digest pop music that maybe will be successful, but definitely will be instantly forgettable. I don't know how you get Bohemian Rhapsody, Wuthering Heights, or even Hong Kong Garden by Susie and the Banshees from an AI. Definitely not, Roxanne. How do you get that?
Yep, you're absolutely right. It's you're never going to be able to replicate that, and it's whatever you got to do, whatever it takes. And I think what it comes down to is people shouldn't be afraid of these things. These are just tools. There's an AI isn't stealing your job. If you're talented and you create good music and good productions, you're gonna, you'll be able to be successful in a certain capacity. So I don't think anyone should really fear this stuff. This is all just new. Everyone always fears new technology because it changes things, and people are afraid of change. And
I get a lot of comments where people say things like, if you come back to them and you ask them some questions, they're like, oh, this is just this, or this is just that. They're always just this, just that. And I say to them, well, you don't have to do it. What kind of stuff are you writing, or what kind of stuff? And I try to engage them. And they'll be like, oh, I can't be bothered. It's not worth doing because of this. And then it starts to sound a little bit like somebody who's not pushing themselves and not working on their craft not working on their craft. And they're using that as an excuse to not do it. So if you find yourself, my honest opinion, if you find yourself doing that and using it as a crutch for not being creative, you've got to move past that. There can't be it's the great thing about Outliers that, I know everybody's talked about Outliers now for about 20 years, but it's an amazing book. And the great thing about Outliers is he talks about that all the time. He talks about if you want to be defeatist and say, all of these tech multi-billionaires all grew up at the same time and went to the same university and were taught, was it Java or JavaScript or whatever it was before everybody else. If you want to say that they were the lucky ones and you don't have to do it, sure, do that. Or go and educate yourself and get your own leg up and learn from it. So the reality is like people look at it and go, well, they were lucky, but they also went there and showed up every day and learned it and worked hard on their craft, Either like use it as an excuse and say you're lucky or you've got a tool that's cheating. I've been involved in records that people have told me were done in completely different ways. The Fray is a great example we were talking about earlier off camera. When we did the first and second Fray records, there would be reviews saying that it was done by committee and that this was safe and they listened to all these bands and all this kind of stuff. The funny thing is I was in the room with these guys. They grew up as like church kids and they knew absolutely nothing about the big current bands at the time. They were just writing songs from a very, very narrow spectrum. When we were in the middle of making the second record, I brought them in like Peter Gabriel 3. I brought them in Melt. I brought them in all these records. And we started listening to Kate Bush, Hounds of Love. I was playing Kate Bush, Hounds of Love back in 2005, 2006. And they didn't know anything about these artists whatsoever. And that seeped into the production that we made on that second record. But I'll read reviews of people that are telling me like it is how the record was made. And I'm like, nope, wasn't made that way at all. And then at the same time I did that Fray record, I did another record which did fairly well, not as big as the Fray record. And I'm not going to say who it is because I don't want it to come across as negative. That album, I went into every single song and rewrote, changed the tempo, the keys, brought the keys down really dramatically. All the chords, all the songs had like 8 chords when they should really have been 3 or 4. They needed to be more Americana and stuff like that. And I simplified all of the songs. And I didn't end up with any writing credit on it, but I ended up with production credit on it because that's what I was doing. I was producing the band. Brought all the keys down, had the singer sing in a much lower voice. It really came across beautifully. And then I read the reviews and they're like comparing the albums and saying what we love about this album that we don't love about the Fray is that this sounds so natural and just, relaxed as though the singer was just... And yet one band, I'm in there completely rewriting songs with them. And the other band, I'm just helping facilitate the creativity. And yet the reviews said the exact opposite. You could literally take the review of one band and apply it to the other and take the other one and put it on there. It's just about people's insecurities and mindsets, yes.
Yeah, that's an amazing point, and I think I suffer from that myself. You get this negative mindset, right, where you're just like, hey, they do that because of this. It's easy because they have that, or and we use it as an excuse to let ourselves off the hook because we don't feel good or we feel a little bit of an imposter syndrome about ourselves. And I'm sure a lot of people deal with stuff like that, where you kind of put other things down because you're trying to make yourself feel good and without even realizing it. But you're absolutely right. You need to let that stuff go. Everything has a use, everything has a tool, and try to look at things in a positive light and not so negatively. And it usually has something to do with yourself.
It's interesting trying to only focus on the AI because I think that the reason why we're sort of I'm breaking off into all these different directions, because I think it's part of the same symptoms that you're just describing perfectly there. It is incredibly important, as you said, to stay positive, to absorb music around you, interpret it through your own filter and come up with your own originality. And if there are tools that help you get there from A to B faster, that's great. And I have no problem with them. At the end of the day, your creativity, your own originality is what's going to kick down doors. It's what makes it's when you listen to Gaultier, somebody that I used to know, whatever it was called. It was so fresh when it came out. When Lord came out with Royals, it was so fresh.
Oh, yeah. Those 2 songs, those are great examples for that. Yeah. Absolutely.
And they had nothing to do with the time. Nothing to do with the time. When Billie Eilish came out with her first stuff, again, nothing to do with the time. Just completely and utterly original for the time. Those 3 artists, and particularly Billie Eilish's career, because obviously it's carried on growing and blossoming, are going to be talked about in 25, 30, 40 years. Just that's the way it is. As Dr. John used to call it, the commerciability. We're so used to commerciability that we are always looking for the genre that's successful or the sound that's successful that we can fit ourselves in. Just get out of that. Just do you and do it super, super original and do it with enough of an accessibility that anybody can get it. Because whether it be like we're talking about Money is still a great pop song. Another Brick in the Wall is an incredible pop song. That was never even written as a full song. It was only a verse and a chorus.
Yeah.
And it was Bob Ezrin that took it and doubled it and then had the choir put on it. That was done in England, but he doubled up the verse and the chorus twice. And then, the whole second verse is just the kid singing it. Guitar solo, off you go, #1 hit single all over the world. This is fun. I'm going to look forward to doing more of these. I shall have to be careful that I don't end up going on all of these the same discussion points all the time.
No, Warren, we like to hear your story. Your stories are what keep the people coming back. I think you have like you said, there's not many not saying you're old or anything, but there's not many people that are like you anymore.
What are you talking about, Sonny? No, my career started in the 90s, so it's like I've got that. When I put out my first records in the mid 90s, and I was still in my early 20s, obviously it was a golden age. CD sales were through the roof. You could sell albums, like I said, off of one song.
Yeah. And
it didn't even have to be a pop top 40. It just had to be, in the top 40 of modern rock. Like I said, Kevin Griffin had Wah, it was good, and sold 2 million albums. He's the one that told me that. He's like, yeah, I sold 2 million copies of my album off of that one song, because you couldn't buy a single. You had to go out and buy my album. And in those days, I think albums were like $17.99 at Walmart, and people had to buy it. So it generated millions and millions of dollars for everybody involved.
The industry is so dramatically different than it was then. How you make money is completely different, and it's an insane. I assume you're happy that you had this background and of seeing that progression from CDs and the record industry.
It was wonderful because I started in the CD time in the mid 90s, but also as a recording engineer, recording all the bands that I was in, demoing them and getting them signed. I was recording on tape. So I went tape, and then when I moved to America after we got a record deal in America, had ADATs and a Soundtrax Topaz console. Probably late 90s, I discovered Pro Tools. And again, we can have a whole discussion about DAWs, but my point is I discovered digital audio and the ability to be able to edit it in a way that I never would have been able to before. And it completely changed my life, and it made my workflow better and faster and opened up the world to me. And I'd already done albums on 1-inch and 2-inch tape and ADATs, and had bands signed and had record deals and had top 40 hits.
Did you adopt digital right away? I mean, obviously you said you went to ADAT. Was that out of...
No, because we did our first album in America, October of 95 we landed, and it was done on 2-inch tape with Don Smith.
Okay.
And then my first album that I did with my next band, then between the two bands, we toured. The album didn't come out till 97. So we toured in 97. Then 98, 99, I started a new band, got a new record deal, and we'd recorded all our demos on ADATs. And when we went into the studio, we went in with Dave Jordan in 98, 99, end of 98, beginning of 99. And we recorded on 2-inch tape and dumped it over to Pro Tools and edited what needed to be edited, which wasn't much, don't get me wrong, but it was a revolution. We're putting 2-inch tape into a Pro Tools and going, we weren't tightening drums, but we were maybe like going, I really like that tape, but I want that drum fill from the second take. And so we'd like copy and paste the drum fill from the second take onto the third take or whatever it was and be like, oh my goodness, this is genius. We thought it was like the greatest thing ever that we could steal a drum fill from one take to another. And that was like life-changing.
Yeah.
We weren't sitting there editing everything tight, not at all. Our drummer, Raul, was amazing. Incredible drummer. So we didn't need to do that. And people weren't making music like that. They weren't making machine type music. They were just making performance music,
But you didn't track directly to Pro Tools until later on?
No, we didn't track directly to Pro Tools. When we did the vocals, we did vocals on Pro Tools comping because it was easier to comp on Pro Tools. But I had comped at that point on fade, not on fader, on mute on a console. So we would take, on a Neve, we'd have 3 vocal takes and then one spare one, and we just go in and unmute
out the lines
vocal
and record it back onto the
Yeah.
Again, time consuming, but that's better than having to splice the tape. So interesting.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was so much fun. Thanks everyone for listening. We're going to try and do this as regularly as possible. And if you haven't already, please go and check out David's AudioHertz. That's HERTZ or Z, as you would say, AudioHertz. Instagram page. It's freaking hilarious. And you can guess my shampoo because I have no idea what it is.
Thank you so much, Warren. And thank you, everyone, for listening. And yeah, thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Talk to you soon. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, tschüss, ciao, goodbye.